A woman stands at the edge of the water. She does not know what an ocean is. No word for it exists yet in her language. She only knows that the land behind her ends and the world in front of her does not. The waves do not stop. They do not explain themselves. They simply continue, past where her eyes can follow, into a distance with no visible shore. Most people imagine early humans as passive wanderers, drifting wherever the land allowed them to go, stopping wherever a coastline told them to stop. That is not Madjedbebe what happened. Somewhere around 60,000 years ago, a small group of humans did something that should not have been possible for a species with no metal tools, no written navigation, no instruments, and no prior experience of open sea. They built something that could float. They loaded it with people, and they pushed it into water where no land was visible in any direction. They crossed an ocean they could not see the other side of. To understand how strange this is, you have to understand what stood between them and the land they eventually reached. The land we now call Australia. Even at the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age, when so much of the planet's water was locked into glaciers that continents reshaped themselves, a barrier of open ocean remained. Modern researchers call it the Wallace line, an invisible boundary in the sea where, even when everything else connected, one channel never closed. On one side, animals and plants of Asian origin. On the other, an entirely different biological world, evolving in isolation for millions of years, untouched by the mainland. The gap between these two worlds was never fully bridged by geology, only by decision. Something crossed it that never should have. Picture the coastline before the crossing. Southeast Asia during the last ice age was not the archipelago we know today. Lower seas exposed vast stretches of land, joining islands into a nearly continuous landmass researchers now call Sundaland. Humans moving through this world could walk for enormous distances without ever needing a boat. Then the land ran out. Not gradually, not with warning signs. The forest simply stopped, and in front of them was water extending farther than the human eye could resolve. No cliffs on the horizon, no haze of a distant coast. Nothing to prove that anything existed beyond this point at all. For nearly the entire history of our species, this was where journeys ended. Water was a wall. It did not matter how curious you were, or how strong, or how desperate. The sea did not care. And then, for reasons still debated, someone decided the wall was not the end of the story. Archaeological evidence suggests that by roughly 65,000 to 60,000 years ago, humans were already present in Australia, a finding that has forced researchers to repeatedly push back timelines they once considered settled. Sites like Madjedbebe in northern Australia have produced stone tools and ground ochre pigments dated to this extraordinary age. Older than almost anywhere else, humans are known to have reached outside of Africa. This means the crossing did not happen after humans had already conquered the logic of the sea elsewhere. It happened near the beginning, before most of the migrations we consider foundational to human history, before humans reached Europe in any significant numbers. The ocean was not crossed last. It was crossed almost first, which raises an uncomfortable question. If this was still early in our species' journey out of Africa, what kind of mind does it take to look at open water, truly open, truly endless to the eye, and conclude that the correct response is to build something and go anyway? There is no surviving boat, no fossilized hull, no fragment of the actual vessel that made the first crossing has ever been found, and researchers believe none likely ever will. Organic materials like bamboo, wood, and fiber lashings do not survive tens of thousands of years in tropical conditions. So, we are left reconstructing an invisible machine from its consequences. Experimental archaeologists have attempted to recreate what such a vessel might have looked like, testing bamboo rafts and simple watercraft against real ocean currents in the region. What they discovered was sobering. Even a well-built raft, launched with intention, is vulnerable to something no amount of courage can fix: current. The waters near Sundaland do not sit still. They move in patterns shaped by monsoon seasons, by shifting winds, by currents strong enough to carry a raft sideways for miles before its passengers ever notice they've drifted off course. This means the crossing was not simply about survival, it was about probability. Multiple journeys, multiple failures, bodies that never arrived, rafts that were pulled apart by weather, or pushed backward by tides, or lost to a horizon that gave no landmark to correct against. Somewhere in that field of failed attempts, one crossing worked. We are not descendants of the attempt. We are descendants of the outcome. Consider what the decision to leave actually required. It required humans to look at an environment offering zero visual confirmation of success. No distant peak, no birds flying toward land, no floating debris hinting at a coastline. And choose to enter it anyway, carrying people who could not swim that distance in a vessel that had never been tested against this exact stretch of water. Modern psychology has a term for calculated action, taken without guaranteed outcome, under conditions of extreme uncertainty. But applying that term here feels almost too clinical. This was not a spreadsheet decision. This was watching your children get onto a raft with you, into water that had never given anyone a reason to trust it. Some researchers argue the crossing may not have been a single dramatic voyage, but a series of smaller expansions. Perhaps accidental drift onto islands, followed later by intentional crossings once the landfall was suspected to exist. Others argue for a more deliberate, planned journey, given the distances involved were too great to survive by accident alone. Either theory arrives at the same unsettling place. At some point, a human being made a decision that assumed a version of the future they had never personally seen. That is not instinct. That is imagination functioning as a survival tool. There is a strange asymmetry hiding inside this event. Every other early human migration we know of followed a visible logic: follow the coastline, follow the herd, follow the river inland, follow the retreat of ice. In each case, the land itself offered a kind of instruction, a visible next step humans could react to. The ocean crossing breaks that pattern entirely. There was no herd to follow into open water, no coastline curving helpfully toward the destination. Nothing in the environment was telling them land existed on the other side. Whatever confidence carried them forward had to be generated internally, a belief constructed without external proof, strong enough to override tens of thousands of years of a very reasonable, very inherited fear of open water. This is the moment our species stopped simply reacting to the world and started acting on a hypothesis about it. And what waited for them on the other side deepens the mystery rather than resolving it. Australia, when they arrived, was unlike anything in their evolutionary memory. Megafauna unknown anywhere else on Earth. Giant flightless birds, enormous marsupial predators. An entire ecosystem that had evolved in isolation, with no prior exposure to a species like this one. A species that planned, that adapted, that altered landscapes with fire within a remarkably short time of arriving. Within thousands of years, a blink, geologically speaking, much of that megafauna would vanish. Researchers continued to debate how much of that extinction wave was driven by human hunting, by human-managed fire regimes, by climate shifts already underway, or by some combination of all three. What is not in dispute is the timing. Humans arrived, and an ancient, isolated world began to change almost immediately. The ocean had protected that world for millions of years. It could not protect it from something that had learned to cross oceans. There is a quiet, unsettling symmetry to this story. The same trait that let humans defeat the wall of open water, the capacity to imagine an unconfirmed future and act on it, is the same trait that reorganizes every ecosystem those humans eventually reach. Curiosity does not stay contained to the moment of the crossing. It becomes a permanent feature of wherever humans arrive next. We tend to tell this story as one of triumph. Humans conquering the sea. Humans reaching a hidden continent no one thought reachable. And it is that. But it is also the earliest known instance of a pattern that would repeat for the next 60,000 years. A species whose imagination consistently outpaces the caution embedded by its own evolutionary history. A species willing to enter a void, not because the void proved itself safe, but because something inside that species had learned to act as if it might not be. Somewhere off the coast of what was once Sundaland, a raft that no longer exists carried people whose names we will never know across water that offered them nothing but the possibility of an ending. They could not see the shore they were reaching for. They had no way of confirming it existed until the moment they arrived, or the moment they didn't. And yet, the choice was made anyway. Every human alive today carries the result of that decision somewhere in the architecture of who we are, not in memory, not in language, but in the fact that our species has never fully stopped doing what that raft did first, looking at the edge of the known world and choosing to go past it regardless. The horizon has never once proven itself safe. We have never once stopped crossing it. Like and subscribe. See you in the next.